With his surprise speech about Trayvon Martin and his own identity as a black man in America, President Obama waded into the thick of the debate that has divided the country long before a Florida jury defended George Zimmerman not guilty. The president joined the discussion already in progress, adding to the voices of Americans who had already been knee-deep in the thorny racial questions raised by the case, which is about right, because our elected officials never have been the ones to begin the conversation about race. And as President Obama said in his speech, they're not going to be the ones to resolve it.
I do recognize that as president, I've got some convening power. For us to be able to gather together business leaders and local elected officials and clergy and celebrities and athletes and figure out how are we doing a better job helping young African-American men feel that they're a full part of this society and that they've got pathways and avenues to succeed. Yeah, I think that would be a pretty good outcome from what was obviously a tragic situation.
So did you see that? It's not going to be our elected leaders. It's going to be those other folks there that President Obama had an idea about. And no sooner had he dropped the mic than the very folks, the kinds of people that President Obama had talked about picking it up, in fact, did exactly that. Yesterday, as New York City joined the 100 cities that were rallying together demanding justice for Trayvon Martin, our own resident member of the clergy, Reverend Al Sharpton, was joined by a couple of President Obama's most famous celebrity supporters, Jay-Z and Beyonce. They took a break from their respective tour schedules to join Reverend Sharpton, Trayvon Martin's mother, Sabrina Fulton, and hundreds of marchers at the New York rally. The Carters' foray into public political activism has been a long time coming for one veteran celebrity activist, Harry Belafonte, who had these words for the couple last August. I think one of the great abuses of this modern time is that we should have had such high-profile artists, powerful celebrities, but they have turned their back on social responsibility. That goes for Jay-Z and Beyonce, for example. Give me Bruce Springsteen, and now you're talking. I think he's really black. When Belafonte snatched both Mr. and Mrs. Carter's wigs, he did so with the force of history and experience. Belafonte has been on the forefront of some of history's most transformative social justice movements for more than 6 decades. He was there 50 years ago at the March on Washington alongside Sidney Poitier, Charlton Heston, Marlon Brando, Lena Horne, and Paul Newman, all who used their stardom to shine a bright spotlight on the cause for equality. This year, as we commemorate the 50th anniversary of that march, a moment to remember has suddenly transformed into a moment to call for equality once again. And as we push for justice, the bright light of celebrity must add fire, not just heat. Joining me now, Chloe Angel, editor of Feministing.com, Tim Wise, author of Dear White America, Blair Kelly, associate professor of history at North Carolina State University and author of Right to Ride, and David Webb, host of The David Webb Show on Sirius XM Patriot. Blair, celebrity and politics. How valuable are celebrity voices in a racial social justice movement?
Somewhat, right? I think it's important to get people's attention who would not normally be paying attention. Mm-hmm. So folks who don't follow politics, who don't know who you are and don't watch MSNBC.
Shocker.
I know. and aren't paying attention to sort of this ongoing political debate will wake up and say, oh, well, Beyonce and Jay were doing something. Oh, well, let me see what they were talking about and see what this movement is about. So it's that mobilizing moment, right? But again, they are not the stuff of organizing.
Right. They're the stuff of the mobilizing. And Chloe, I guess, I've been thinking a little bit about this. There was a moment when some folks waded in, particularly around Trayvon Martin, who were a little bit surprising. Dave Zirin, who's one of our favorites here, has been calling for LeBron James to now say something, mostly because he helped to organize the Miami Heat in protest initially around the Trayvon Martin shooting. Is that fair for us to make a call to say, hey, you did this with the hoodies, now we want to hear from you now?
Well, what I hear Harry Belafonte saying is that these people have privilege, right? They have a platform, they have people who listen to them and who value them in one way, and that might be transmuted into them being listened to in other ways. The most obvious case of that is white people who have privilege, white people who need to step up. When President Obama says other people need to step up and end racism, he didn't say it because of the climate that we live in. He can't say it, but I'm going to say it. White people.
Oh, so it's not that we need to hear from LeBron James. It's that we need to hear from Bruce Springsteen.
Whenever people are in a position of privilege, and that could be skin privilege, it could be gender and sex privilege, it could be money privilege, celebrity privilege. Right. There is an obligation, I think, to use that privilege as responsibly as possible. And most all of us have some of it in some way, shape, or form. It's about how we use it. And so for those of us who are white trying to be allies in the struggle against racism, we try to use that in a responsible way, men fighting sexism doing the same thing.
That's useful. I guess that's how I've tried to think about being an ally around LGBT issues, right? So having a TV show is a privilege. I am not myself gay, but it gives me a space, an opportunity to have folks at the table who may not otherwise get that voice. Yeah, David.
I hear this from Tim a lot. Privilege, white privilege, white. And it's almost as if white people are relegated to not being able to see issues by this narrative. Or that black people, by the way, racism is about power and control. Blacks, Hispanics, every society in the world has had some form of either slavery or racism, whether it's Goths, Visigoths, modern times, you name it. And it exists today in Saudi Arabia and other areas around the world. So what we're talking about is not whether you're white or you're black or you're a celebrity. Celebrities wade in, they're insulated to a degree because Marlon Wayans can say outrageous things but be insulated. Responsible celebrities can do the right thing by bringing their voice to it. But we keep bringing this into a privilege issue when it's really about the nation and the culture. Whites are not evil. Blacks are not evil. But it's being presented by a lot of people in these quarters that for some reason there's a privilege assigned to a skin color. They're the actions of people. The actions of people, content of character is what we should judge. And no, let me finish this point. Martin Luther King spoke to the conscience of a nation.
Sure.
He didn't speak to black people. He didn't speak to white people.
He specifically called out white people.
No, he did not.
No, he absolutely did. The letter to the Birmingham jail, from the Birmingham jail, is a letter to moderate white clergy. And he says, clear. He's like, white moderate clergy who tell us we must wait. Here's why we can't. Look, I think it is not an indication. In fact, I think using the language of privilege is an indication of not saying that white people are evil. Right. When you talk about privilege, so for example, I have heteronormative privilege. I happen to be able to walk around the world, to marry and divorce, to bear children, to any of those things without anyone even giving me a second glance. And I retain that privilege as a heterosexual, whether I'm an ally or whether I'm against LGBT people. I mean, privilege doesn't require
we all
evil.
came in this room, we're all, so far as able-bodied. So we all have able-bodied privilege, and we don't think about that. It doesn't make this ableist. But it doesn't make this discriminatory.
It's normal. This is the problem.
Oh, no, but that's
it's not normal for the disabled. It's not for normal.
But that's the problem. If you call it normal, but see, I think
what's wrong with walking into this room? It's normal.
No,
if you're disabled, you don't do that.
It's not a privilege.
Granted, here's what I would say, David. Here's the problem with walking into this room. So I think it's a great question. I love the question around able-bodiedness. So if you look behind you, my cameras probably can't see it, but to get onto this stage, you have to walk down 3 stairs. There is no way to get here without walking down 3 stairs. That means that when I think about booking this show, I have never once booked someone who is in a wheelchair to sit at this stage. And the reason that I cannot is because my building is built in a way that makes it impossible for a person dealing with disability to show up at my table. And that is privilege. The fact that
it's not.
That for able-bodied people,
you make an accommodation that says you have a ramp. The ADA, which grew largely out of this, was that we have to make it accessible for people who have a disability.
Amen. And you know what? Amen. Absolutely. Which is exactly why we then must recognize male privilege and black privilege and say we must make accommodations in a world that has privilege.
You're not super because you're normal, and you're not less because you have a disability.
When you keep saying the word normal,
it's normal to walk. Most people walk around normally. When you talk about this,
there are lots of people who aren't normal under your designation. Am I normal as a black woman?
The opposite of that is abnormal, and that is a judgment call. That sounds incredibly offensive.
It's not
especially when you compare it.
Don't put words in my mouth. I'm not saying that.
You said normal 5 times.
But I'm not saying abnormal.
And if we put it on
the opposite of normal.
All right, so but David, if we put that on race, so if we take it and put it on race, so one could say potentially, if you took the context out of, or the way that normal reads, and you just said it's normative on a normal curve, that most people, a majority of people, do not need wheelchair assistance, then that is a true with a little t statement. But if you do it on race and you say that whiteness is normal, that it is normative, first of all, it is empirically false.
So is black.
Granted, it's empirically false that whiteness is normative. But the thing is, it doesn't come with just empirics. When you say that one condition of life, maleness, able-bodiedness, straightness, is normal, it does imply that everyone else is abnormal, and therefore
it does not.
The opposite of normal is abnormal, not because I say so, the dictionary says so. Your problem is with basic English grammar, not with me or anyone else at this table.
Well, you can use the ad hominem attacks all you want, but the fact is that we have to deal with these things where they are. It is not somehow bad not to be normal. It is not abnormal not to be normal. We're different. We are different as people, men, women, young, short, tall, fat, whatever it is. And the problem we have is the polarizing nature of what happens when you start talking about privileges being something bad.
Doing Melissa's job for her because she is the moderator here. I would really like to get back to the idea that it is partly white people's responsibility to end racism.
Yeah. I mean, be careful, because I know that when Zerlina Maxwell said it was in part men's responsibility to end sexual assault, she was abused pretty heavily for that. But I agree. I think that all of us, right, all of us who are in positions of privilege, and I'm going to accept that, who have one of these so-called normative identities, do have responsibilities around that. What any of this has to do with Beyonce, I'm not exactly sure anymore, but there you go. Tim Wise, thanks for being here. Coming up, the irony of a guy named Cuccinelli being opposed to oral sex. Wow, seriously.